Hi everyone, welcome to another video. In today's video, we are going to look at how to load metadata into a table. And we're going to base this on week 3 exercise from the Frosty Friday Snowflake Challenge. Let's start out by reading the assignment. So if you've already done week 1, this starts off in a very similar way. We have a bunch of CSV files coming in from that are actually stored in an S3 bucket, and we want to bring them in. But there's an additional challenge this time. Some important data is uploaded as well, and these files have a different naming scheme, and they need to be tracked. So we need to have metadata stored for reference in a separate table. You can recognize these files because of a file inside the S3 bucket, which is keywords.csv, which contains all the keywords that mark a file as important. So we want to get only the file names that have keywords contained in this specific CSV. It's a bit complicated to understand it maybe, but it will get more clear as we go. So as usual, I would like to first show you my thought process, and in the second part, I will just quickly go through all the steps to get to the solution. So if you're only interested in the solution, please go ahead and skip to the second part. If you're interested in seeing my thought process and what I learned along the way, follow along from the beginning. All right, so the first thing I want to do is to actually create a file format if I don't already have one. So I'm going to start out by creating the file format and then by creating a stage based on the URL that we get from the Frosty Friday page. So the first thing I do is I run these two pieces of code. And the second thing I want to do is to query the metadata. So I want to see what's inside my stage, what I have just brought in from the S3 bucket into my stage. So I have run already the first two pieces of code, and now what I did is I went to Snowflake documentation and copied the snippet for querying the metadata, and I'm then gonna modify it so that I can query what I'm interested in. Indeed, here I forget that my stage 1 doesn't exist, but I actually need the name of the stage I just created, and that is week 3 Frosty. There we go. So this way we have file name, file row number, and 2 additional columns. We actually only have 1 column, so that's good to know. It's a CSV, and everything is divided by a comma, but it's just 1 column for now. All right, so this way we have a look at each individual row. But actually, what I want to do is to just have a look at the file names, right? So I want to group it by file name, and when I do that, I also want to make sure to count the row number or to get rid of that column. Okay, now we finally have only the file names. There's always the option to order it alphabetically, so order by 1 or order it by file name. Okay, and if we do this, we see clearly that we have one file called keywords. We have certain files that follow the pattern and some that are outliers. And those are the ones we want to put in our final table. So our next step is to create a table just with the keywords from the keyword CSV file. But before doing that, I would like to look at the metadata of this CSV. So I copy and paste the snippet for the metadata querying and adapt it to my use case. And I struggled here a bit because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my snippet of code. And it turns out to simply be here where I add the CSV name. Snowflake doesn't accept double inverted commas. You need single inverted commas. I wasn't used to this because in the past where I used SQL, this wasn't a problem. So it took me a bit. So I thought maybe I can leave this in for you guys if you didn't know this. That's the case. So when I adjusted the inverted commas, no more problem. And here we can see that we have only 1 column. And this column, just like every CSV, is divided by, delimiter. In this case, these are commas. But the other thing I can notice is that my first row is actually the header. Those are the headers of the table. So the next thing I want to do is actually to go back to the file format and skip the header. So I go back to my very first snippet and add skip header. And of course, if you can't remember exactly what the code looks like, feel free to check the Snowflake documentation like I did. It's skip underscore header equals 1 if you just want to skip the first row. So I rerun every little chunk of code. And then when I get to my very last one, you see that we don't have 4 rows anymore, but just 3. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to create the keywords table. So we write again, create or replace table keywords, and we add a certain amount of columns to our discretion. In this case, I just add 1 and call it column 1. And then I copy into the table only the keywords CSV. And in order to make sure that I'm only pulling into the table the keywords CSV, I go back to the Snowflake documentation and check how I can do that. And I find a function that says files equal, and we can select one or multiple files. So I type files equal, and I copy the name of the CSV. And here you see just a bit of trial and error to figure out what was wrong with the code. I had typed copy into table, it's just copy into, and I didn't need challenge _3/, but just the name of the CSV. So the next thing I want to do is to split those cells. And I actually want to keep only the first part, so it would be the first column. In order to do that, I first look at my table. And yes, we see that we have 3 columns put in one cell. So I only want to keep the first one because that's the one that contains the keywords. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function called split part. So split part is something that, again, I found on the Snowflake documentation. I always go back there to make sure that I'm writing the code correctly. And this function needs 3 parts. We need to tell Snowflake, okay, please split the column called, in this case, key. The delimiter we want you to look at is a comma. And there's a third part that at first I forgot. So indeed, I run this part and it doesn't work. I went back to the documentation because we also need to tell Snowflake which chunk, which bit of the cell to keep. And in this case, we want to keep the very first all to the left. So in this case, I said comma 1 and rerun the code. And there we go. We have our perfect table. Just a reminder that now we have not modified the table. We just queried the table and it's not permanent. So moving forward, what we want to do is to create a table that I called important and to store in that table all of the file names and to count the number of rows for each file. So we already have this snippet from before. We can just copy it and just never mind here, this was a bit of trial and error, but actually what we want to do is to create a replace table important with 2 columns, one that's called file name and has a varchar data type, and one that is called a row number. Again, varchar, you can use integer, doesn't really matter. Then we want to copy into important from, and here we want to use that snippet with the metadata. So select metadata, $ file name, that will be our first column, and then metadata $ file row number. And here we need an underscore, not a dash. And then, of course, we want to say select this data from our stage. In this case, stage name, I'm going to copy it. It's week 3 _ Frosty. And then we can run this and make sure it runs and it loads just like it should. Okay, and then what we want to do next is just run a simple select statement. Remember that if you want to see the CSV file names repeated only once, you want to add that group by clause. So just like we did at the beginning. And this way we can see our clean, simple table with just 1 row per file name. All right, so here comes the part that I struggled with the most, but that was so satisfying when I managed to solve it. I started out by saying, okay, why don't we use the contain function? So I found that actually, yeah, indeed, Snowflake has a contains function. I looked it up, I looked at how it works, and it said, okay, say contain, then the column in the table you're looking at, and then what you want that column to contain. So it can be ABC or whatever else. And it can also be, I mean, I realized through trial and error that it can also be a snippet of a select statement. So let me just show you what I did. So select file name, count row, important where. So I put a filter, I put a condition where file name contains, and I tried to just put this snippet, right? Split part key. I was like, okay, let's figure it out. Will this work? And it actually kind of worked, but it was telling me that single row subqueries returns more than one row. So I told myself, what if we put a max here? Will that work? And as we will find out in just a second, yeah, always make sure to count to make sure that you have enough parentheses. It did work, but I didn't want just the max. I wanted all of the rows to be there. So I thought, okay, let me try something different. And I found this function. I thought, oh, could it be like where file name like ABC or where file name I like ABC? I tried that. It also didn't work out. I'm curious if any of you guys are able to make the like function work, because I thought that could be a good option, but it didn't work out for me. So I finally had this eureka moment, and I asked myself, what if I use a join between the two tables? And of course you need a join on a condition. So I was like, oh, I wonder if that's possible. And yes, finally that was the final solution. I was so happy to find out. So I joined keywords, and here I struggled a bit to figure out, okay, how can I solve this? I said, okay, on file name equals, and then we take that split part key. So I try to make it work like this, but it's, yeah, I don't know, maybe this is possible with a bit more experience. Maybe I can figure out why it was returning an error on, I'm not sure. So I tried like this a bit, and then I thought I can use contains maybe on a join. I tried that and I still was getting an error. So I thought, what if rather than having the split part function in the join, what if I first alter the table and add a column that is exactly what I want, so the key column, and then after that I try to join on contain with that column already made. So that was my approach. So I looked up the Snowflake documentation to look for alter table keywords, add column keys, and then I copied the snippet with the split part. And finally, I found out that I needed as column keys, then varchar, which is the data type, and then as, and I defined it, and that worked perfectly. So now I had the column directly already present in the keywords table. So I went back to my join and I said join on contains file name, comma, key. And that worked, and oh my god, so happy that this worked. The only thing I wanted to do was to match the name of the second column, which I believe was number of rows or something like that. And I really wanted to match it to be identical to what we had in the assignment of our Frosty Friday. And yeah, finally, well, there was just a small addition. And yes, so it's possible to join on condition in Snowflake, and this is how I solved it. I haven't looked up other solutions yet, so I'm not sure if there are other ways. I'm curious to learn about it, but this works. So thank you for following until now, and now let's go and summarize everything we've done so far, step by step, without all my mistakes and everything. So for everyone that came here just for the solution, here's the part for you, and let's get started. All right, here we go. So let's start out by creating a file format. Then we go ahead and based on the URL that we got on the Frosty Friday challenge, we create a stage. Up next, we will need to query the metadata. So select metadata file name from our newly created stage. And if we want, we can group it by file name. We can also not do that, but in that case, we will see the file names repeat a lot of times. So I prefer to group it. And also there's the option to order it by file name. So let's run this snippet. And we see the result. We have a clean list of file names. Moving forward, we want to look only at the keywords. So let's try to do that. So select metadata file name. Here we have this column and S1, and S1 is the column contained in the CSV file called keywords.csv. So what we notice here is that we have 3 columns, and we actually only want to get the very first column. So we want to get that column, but in order to do that, we want to create a table to contain this, because so far we're only looking at the metadata that is actually still in the stage. So we create a table called keywords, and then we copy into keywords from our stage only the file keywords.csv. There we go, this is successful. Then what we want to do is to actually take only the first column. So if we remember from earlier, we had 3 cells. Let's run that again just to keep it fresh in mind. So here we have actually 3 columns. Since it's a CSV, it contains commas, but we can turn these into columns, and we only need actually the very first one. So let's go ahead and use the split part function to do that. And we are going to tell Tableau, please split column 1 with the delimiter comma, and only keep the first one. So actually, I want to show you what happens if we say 3 rather than 1. And we run this. Actually, we get the third option. If we do it 2, we have the second, but we want to say 1. Okay. So rather than keeping this as a query, because the query does not modify the table, it just queries the table temporarily, we want to alter the table so that it has this column that we just looked at, and it's as a permanent part of the table. So let's alter table keywords to add a column called keys that has a varchar data type, and here is the condition we want it created on. We run the snippet, and of course we can have a look at it. So select all from from keywords. There we go. And let's add, there we go. So we have the column 1 that has the original data, and then we have taken only the first column here. So the first value for each cell. Moving forward, we want to create another table. This table, we wanted to have all of the names of our CSV files. So create or replace table important, where the first column is called file name and the second file row number. We run this to create the table, and then we pull the metadata from, again, our stage. Perfect. And the last but not least is we want to, first of all, if we maybe want to have a better look, it's select, we want to select file name and count row number. Actually, these are, yes, file name and row number. That's the name. There we go. Count row number from important. And again, we can group it by file name. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Okay, now we have all of our files. We actually want only the files whose name contains one of the keywords. So this is the final solution. So we can select file and count file row number like we did here from important. And we want to join it on keywords. So the table we created only contains the keywords on the condition that file name contains keys. And that's the column we added, right, when we altered the table. So if I run this, we get the same identical result as on the solution of Frosty Friday. So yeah, we made it. I will add this to my GitHub, so you can go check that code, and it will be linked in the description for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you next month.